I recently took up gardening, and this is definitely like one of those creepy, awkward Vogue videos, but like in a New York backyard. I started writing Far Cry from the Ritz. We actually did that one in, I think, 2 sessions. The song was pretty much written in one complete sit-down session over the course of 6 hours. The perspective of the song. This song is really a character. This song is more of a character than I think any of my other songs, except maybe Obsessed, which I know many of you like. That was definitely a character as well. But Far Cry from the Ritz takes the perspective of the witch in Hansel and Gretel. And in this version, she's kind of a little sexed up. She's a little fun. I had just watched Versailles, the Canal Plus show, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, when I wrote it. And there is definitely the idea of who the witch historically has been, especially in the 18th century. I wanted to capture of the past as she might have actually been. And witches of the past, sometimes people who are accused of being witches obviously played a lot with Christianity. So that's going to be a theme throughout. Let's dive into a direct lyric dissection. So when I put it out to you all, what lyrics do you want to hear about? There were a couple of patterns that emerged. The first one that I wanted to talk about is 10 impossible things before breakfast.
10 impossible things before breakfast.
Obviously, that's a Lewis Carroll quote that is famously from Alice in Wonderland. I think she says 6 impossible things before breakfast. I always like to think up 6 impossible things before breakfast. But I thought 10 impossible things before breakfast was even more cool. I'm like from New York. I'm born and raised here. I've lived here my whole life. So breakfast is breakfast. It's not breakfast. It is breakfast. So it fit from an affectation perspective. The actual line, it's a far cry from the Ritz.
It's a far cry from the Ritz, but it's the leather glove that fits.
My family traveled a lot when I was younger, and my dad was like very anti-nice hotel. He wanted to have let's say one step above Motel 8 was like the rule. Anytime we would check into a room, my mom would always kind of say, well, it's not the Ritz. So I internalized this, and I thought that to give kind of like that nice sassy villain edge to the character, she would be constantly commenting on how it's a far cry from the Ritz, but it's the leather glove that fits these 10 impossible things before breakfast. And can you just imagine shoving them into a glove, like a black leather glove? It's so weird. I thought it was compelling.
I thought it was an OJ reference.
Oh, sell your soul to candy, floss, and rock and roll.
Sell your soul to candy, floss, and rock and roll. This one is really about, wow, I got so British there for a second. This one is really not about Lewis Carroll at all. This one is very much, we just wanted something that was a little Smells Like Teen Spirit on this. I wanted something that sounded like a band of zombie teenagers at a cheerleading situation. A chant that zombie teenagers would have. I think that there is an element of naivete and growing out of fairy tales. I was very, very influenced, I think, visually and artistically by the Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters movie that came out many years ago. I really loved that film. I wanted a big, swelling string section, and I was like, what is more deadpan to add to this? That we can make it feel like that growing up within the fantasy and fairy tale. And I was like, in high school, you're kind of starting to reject fairy tales and the tales of your childhood, but there's still this element of how it lives in your psyche. And so that's where the candy floss and rock and roll comes in. And I always thought that if we ever made merch for this song, it would be half of them would say candy floss and half of them would say rock and roll on the back, and they'd be varsity pieces. Yeah. One of the questions that actually kept coming up is 2 parts tourmaline, 1 shot in the dark.
2 parts tourmaline, 1 shot in the dark.
I wanted it to feel like a recipe because my verses are often very narrative. They're very story driven. There's a lot of storytelling. But for this one, I wanted the story to be told in the elements that are evoked. So I wanted you to feel as though you were in the witch's kitchen and you were seeing all of these rare, weird things that she's talking about, 6 parts contrition, 2 parts shellac. So for
turn up the burner or pass the syringe.
I really love that line. That's one of my favorites. And that kind of sets the scene. We're kind of getting there. The second verse is a little more powerful. It's really jazzy, but I really like how it ends, right?
2 parts tourmaline, 1 shot in the dark. You don't need a patron saint, just meet me at the stables in the park.
And I love stables. I'm a horse girl. I love horses. I used to do dressage when I was younger. A lot of things happen in stables. You know, there's often an intrigue with the stable boy or the stable girl, or you're running away, so you have to go to the stables. You have a special thing that's delivered in like the 18th century. It's going to come straight to the stables. Like that's where the mail came a lot of the time. So a lot of things happen in the stables, and the idea of a public stable, like meet me at the stable in the park, like that's like heading out to a train station. Like shit went down at the stable in the park. And I love the idea of a patron saint because I also envisioned it like under the statue of a patron saint. That was a visual reference for me. So that's one of my that's probably my favorite line in the song. I don't know where we're gonna plant it, but here, take it. I'm gonna. The most common question, Elle, why did you quit the internet? I quit the internet because I needed to really figure out what I wanted to do on the internet. I've done fashion girly, I've done jewelry, which I never stopped doing. I've done comedy, I've done queer history and exploration. I love all of those things. But I know that the thing that I need to do to feel whole at the end of the day is music. And that is what I'm going to be sharing with you. When I decided to quit the internet, which was not a light decision, and I did quit for about 3 months, a little less than 3 months. It was driven from a place of needing to replenish, which I think is something we don't talk about a lot, like needing to step away so that you can come back or not come back. I wasn't 100% sure that I was going to come back, and I'm happy that I'm sharing my art now, but there was this need to create constantly, just like this never-ending need to create for a self that I don't even identify with being. Like maybe that's who I was during the pandemic or many years ago when I had, well, not many, but a couple years ago when I had my first song pop off and all of this. I'm really trying to listen to myself and really trying to see what is best for me. And I want to throw this question open to you. Do you feel like your time on the internet serves the self that you want to be? Because I struggle with this every day.